Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Michael Wald, the Blood Detective, and welcome to this presentation, which I've entitled Inflamm-Aging, the Cause of All Disease. So I just want to let you know what you're going to hear in the next few moments. Number one, that all human diseases and medical specialists in all areas of medicine, from oncology to gynecology to natural medicine, know that chronic low-grade or moderate levels of inflammation tend to underlie practically all diseases in human beings. And the fact of this holistic perspective that so many things can result from inflammation means if you manage that inflammation, you can prevent or mitigate or improve or stave off many different diseases. So we're going to talk about the different types of inflammation, the blood testing from inflammation, and very importantly, what practical steps you can take daily to modify your inflammatory response to life. So I'll begin by letting you know that I'm a doctor of chiropractic. I also have a master's degree in nutrition, as well as being a sports nutritionist. I'm also board certified in nutrition, and I have a PhD in holistic philosophy. I also provide acupuncture, and I'm a life coach. I attended medical school and earned my MD diploma, but I do not have an active license to practice medicine. So this information is for your education, so please use it carefully. It's not meant as a substitute for sound medical or health advice. So let's get into a very important area to reduce inflammation, and that's your lifestyle. So if you want to reduce inflammation, you have to be engaged in some amount of physical activity. So engaging in regular, moderate intensity exercise like brisk walking, for about 30 to 45 minutes, 5 days a week will lower inflammation as long as you have a reasonable diet. If you have a poor diet and you exercise a lot, you will actually promote inflammation. We could do another whole podcast on that, but it should be common sense to you that we need an adequate diet to manage the nutritional impact of exercise so we can get the benefits of health exercise, which are, at least one area, is lowering of inflammation, which is a big area. We want to prioritize our sleep, not just getting the 7 to 9 hours of restful sleep every night, but also to make sure that you're going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time, because studies have shown that that regularity may be more important than the absolute number of hours you're getting of sleep. And that will help reduce systemic inflammatory levels significantly. And you can measure these on lab tests. And then you want to manage your stress through mindfulness, meditation, or deep breathing. And also I'm going to throw in there some semantic training because, I see a lot of people who practice these sorts of things that I just mentioned, mindfulness meditation. We can throw yoga in there, for example, and nothing to take away from them except that they don't necessarily change your mindset and how you view the world. In other words, I've seen people who are advanced yogis and they're not particularly nice people when I meet them. So we want to make sure that we adjust our semantic filters to life so that, for example, if we have gratitude and we wake up appreciating gratitude, the lens for that day, if we're mindful of this, will be gratitude and not upset and being an idiot. I think you get what I'm talking about. And then we want to avoid smoking and severely limiting your alcohol intake to no more than 1 drink per day. But I believe it's the American Cancer Society that said that there is no amount of alcohol that does not increase cancer risk in both men and women. And then there is the anti-inflammatory foods, but please realize that one person could have a pro-inflammatory response to one food and another person might have an anti-inflammatory response to the same food. So there really aren't, strictly speaking, inflammatory and anti-inflammatory foods. To figure out what foods are pro or anti-inflammatory for a person, usually testing has to be done. And sometimes you can just see the response on people. I have one person with a very rare type of skin cancer, and when he eats turmeric, in high concentrations, his lesions on his skin are clearly better. And when he eats red meat, they get red and raised and itchy. So we don't need tests to know that, meat in that case is a pro-inflammatory food for this individual. But another person might react to a pro-inflammatory, let's say broccoli as pro-inflammatory, which you would say to yourself, well, isn't broccoli a healthy food? A food isn't healthy unless it's appropriate for the individual. But in terms of giving you general guidelines, we know that a Mediterranean style food plan is on the anti-inflammatory side for most individuals. It's rich in vegetables, fruits, nuts, olive oil, and fish. Also avocados, which are monounsaturated fats. The olive oil, very, very important as an omega-9 fatty acid, anti-inflammatory. And also, of course, the Processed and refined, high carbohydrate, sugary foods are all pro-inflammatory practically in everyone. And then fiber, 30 to 40 grams per day to support gut health and immune balance. And then anti-inflammatory spices like turmeric, ginger, or garlic. I prefer when people, you can add these foods, of course, to your diet, the ginger and the garlic and the turmeric, for example. But if you take nutritional supplements of turmeric, for example, you're going to get very, very strong anti-inflammatory effects that are very measurable on your lab work. And some people need to see that on their lab work. I mean, I certainly like to see proof on my lab work as well. If I'm feeling good, fine. If I'm feeling good and my lab showed that the inflammation went down, that's real. Because a lot of people could feel fine and they have very high levels of inflammation until that inflammation causes, let's say, a block in their artery in their brain, and then they get a stroke all of a sudden. But it's not all of a sudden. It's from chronic levels of inflammation over time. They get to a threshold, and then the health problem happens, and the person could be completely asymptomatic, having no symptoms, which is why regular testing is important. Next, there are 4 nutritional supplements that I feel are worth consideration for some people. Now, you might have something in your medical history that precludes you from having any of these. So, for example, turmeric, omega-3 fatty acids, and resveratrol, they're all blood thinners. So if you are at risk of a hemorrhagic stroke, you would not want to take these. If you have not been taking those nutrients, but are on anticoagulant medications like aspirin or warfarin, which is Coumadin, then if you take these, you can bleed excessively. And of course, most of these nutrients you'd have to discontinue 3 to 4 days before a surgical procedure and for 3 to 4 days or so after. But if you don't have any contraindications for taking nutrients, these are just 4 of them that I found in my 33 or so years of clinical practice are of the most important ones, such as curcumin, which is turmeric, 500 to 1,000 milligrams with black pepper, piperine. That helps the absorption of the curcumin dramatically. But most of my clients, the amounts of turmeric they need is in the several thousands. So I do a body composition test that lets me know their metabolic rate and their percentage of lean mass in their body, and they get a certain number of milligrams of each of these nutrients per kilogram of lean mass. That's the best way to dose, in my opinion. Remember, because the doses on the outside of a bottle were just made up by people who produce the vitamins or whatever the nutritional product is. And then there's omega-3 fatty acids. Definitely have a very strong potential for anti-inflammation and reducing inflamm-aging, as does turmeric. And I should mention that there are different types of inflammation in the body, which we'll see in a moment in the next slide. So you need different nutrients to cover all those bases. If I look at your laboratory work, I might find that you need completely different nutrition than this, although the chances are you'll need at least some of these things that I've listed here, but you may need others depending on your unique chemistry. And then there's trans resveratrol, which is extremely important for modifying gene expression and also helping to downregulate certain genes that would normally cause all kinds of inflammation. And then vitamin D3. It is an anti-inflammatory. It's a gene regulator as well. So we want to make sure to get a vitamin D3 blood test to know how much vitamin D3 that you need. And then if you take the vitamin D3 that you supposedly need, you want to check your test again to make sure it actually changed the lab test. I have so many people with abnormal values in inflammation, vitamin D levels. They do all the right things, and then they assume that's going to fix everything, and they never check back. And it's not just their fault, because their doctors aren't saying, and by the way, you need to come back at this time. I don't understand it, but I think you get it. So what are some of the practical laboratory tests, what I call the blood detective laboratory suggestions, that you want to be mindful of? Because if you're not mindful of these, your doctor will not be mindful of these. Number 1 is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So there are 2 C-reactive protein tests. One is called C-reactive protein, and the other one is called cardio C-reactive protein. The cardio one is the one that you want all the time. So this test is a assessment of a low-grade or high-grade inflammation. And then there's also interleukins. 2 of them are interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. So these are what are known as cytokines, and they promote inflamm-aging in even even tumor development. So if you're taking turmeric and you're taking omega-3 fatty acids or any other types of anti-inflammatory nutrients, you want to make sure that your C-reactive protein is going down, that your interleukin and tumor necrosis factors are going down. And with vitamin D, deficiency is linked to immune dysfunction and cancer risk, and an upregulation of a variety of inflammatory markers, several of them in fact. And then you might want to consider what's called an oxidative stress panel, where various nutrients that control inflammation and oxidation in the body are checked. One example would be glutathione, a very important tripeptide immune molecule and anti-inflammatory. So these are just some things. Now what I do, what I a client is, I'm mindful of those tests, I'm mindful of the nutritional supplements, but based on a more detailed conversation with someone and some laboratory work based on that conversation, which means I'm basing the laboratory tests on assessing their current level of health right now, a baseline of a variety of inflammatory markers, and then making sure when we check them again, everything is all normalized. So foods are suggested based on blood work, and by the way, not just a blood type. That's complete nonsense, blood type. I might rely on 150 different aspects of someone's labs, and I'm not joking, and sometimes it's just a few dozen, to figure out what they need to eat, not just blood type. It's an interesting idea, but there's zero science behind that. And I challenge anyone listening to this to provide me with any science behind blood type diet. I've seen people lose weight, for example, with a blood type diet. When I've looked at their chemistry, it's far worse. So we don't want to compromise our health. Anyway, so based on individual assessments, we determine what the laboratory tests are, and you end up getting a list of what you need to eat in terms of breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack plans based on your chemistry, and then specific exercise recommendations. And ultimately, last point is, all of these efforts must result in lower levels of these inflammatory mediators, which are associated with living longer and better. And not just living longer in terms of years, but living longer during the non-disability stage of life. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you at the next podcast.